Deadite Jason. The theory that Jason Voorhees draws his power from the Necronomicon could explain decades of unanswered questions about the Friday the 13th franchise. In Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, released in 1993, director Adam Marcus intentionally placed the Book of the Dead from the Evil Dead series in a scene showing the basement of the Voorhees house. Fans immediately seized on this Easter egg, developing a theory that Pamela Voorhees used the cursed tome to resurrect her drowned son Jason sometime after 1957. This would explain how Jason survived his supposed drowning as a child, why he appears as a young boy in the dream sequence at the end of the original 1980 film, and most importantly, how he continues returning from death throughout the series. According to the theory, Jason functions as a Deadite, the demonic entities from the Evil Dead universe, which would account for his increasing strength, regenerative abilities, and near immortality across 12 films. Marcus himself confirmed he placed the book as a potential crossover setup between the franchises. However, the official Friday the 13th wiki explicitly states Jason is not a Deadite, calling the appearance simple fan service. The theory remains unconfirmed speculation, yet it provides one of the most elegant explanations for Jason's supernatural resilience that the franchise itself never bothered to address. This demonstrates how a single prop placement by a creative director can spawn decades of fan theorizing and attempted universe building. Antichrist Michael. One extreme interpretation suggests Michael Myers is literally the Antichrist, rather than simply a representation of pure evil. This theory gained traction after Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, released in 1995, introduced the supernatural Cult of Thorn backstory. Writer Daniel Ferrens established that druids placed a demonic curse on infant Michael, granting him supernatural abilities and an insatiable need to kill family members on Halloween night. Fans have extended this canonical supernatural element to propose Michael parallels Damien from The Omen, marked from birth for a dark destiny. Supporting evidence includes John Carpenter's decision to credit the character only as the Shape in the original 1978 film, never listing Michael Myers by name. Carpenter described him as almost a supernatural force, a force of nature, an evil force that's loose, that is, unkillable. Dr. Loomis repeatedly refers to Michael as having the devil's eyes, and being purely and simply evil. The character survives 6 gunshots, multiple stabbings, being burned alive, and falling from a second-story window in the first film alone. In Halloween Kills, from 2021, Laurie Strode explicitly states that Michael is the essence of evil, and that the more he kills, the more he transcends. The 2022 film Halloween Ends describes his influence as an infection capable of spreading to others. The theory remains speculation, but it represents the logical extreme of the franchise's supernatural elements. This interpretation demonstrates the tension between Carpenter's original vision of unexplained evil and later filmmakers' attempts to provide concrete mythology, with fans sometimes preferring the most definitive answers possible. Faculty Experiment. Urban Legend, released in 1998, centers on a killer who murders college students in ways that mirror famous urban legends. The film takes place at Pendleton University, where students are systematically killed based on horror folklore. A persistent fan theory suggests the murders were orchestrated as a twisted psychology experiment. According to this interpretation, the university's administration, or a secret faculty group, arranged the killings to study how urban legends spread and evolved during a real crisis. The theory points to suspicious elements throughout the film. Campus security remains incompetent despite multiple deaths, allowing the killer repeated access to buildings and victims. The school's folklore professor seems to have extensive knowledge of the legends being enacted, almost as if anticipating them. Most tellingly, the university administration attempts to suppress information about the deaths rather than properly investigate or warn students, suggesting institutional knowledge or involvement. The theory proposes that multiple people wore the killer's parka throughout the film, explaining how the murderer appears in different locations so quickly. The film reveals one killer with personal motives, but it never addresses whether others were involved or whether the administration's incompetence was deliberate. The movie leaves enough ambiguity that the experiment theory remains possible, without explicit denial from the filmmakers or a definitive explanation for the administration's suspicious behavior. This interpretation of hidden institutional evil remains unconfirmed but theoretically plausible. Freddy Absorbs. A compelling theory suggests Freddy Krueger steals supernatural abilities from every teenager he kills, explaining his dramatic power escalation across the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Reddit user SofthandSam developed this interpretation after noticing that the dream demons only granted Freddy the ability to enter dreams and exist eternally, not the elaborate reality manipulation powers he displays in later films. In the original 1984 movie, Freddy demonstrates relatively limited abilities, mostly using his signature clawed glove for physical attacks. By Dream Warriors in 1987, he's shape-shifting, walking on ceilings, and manipulating the dream world in increasingly complex ways. That same film features teenagers with specific dream powers. Kristen can pull others into her dreams, and Joey manipulates sound with his powerful voice. Freddy explicitly states in Dream Warriors that he gains strength from the souls of those he kills, establishing a canonical mechanism for power absorption. Later installments show him turning victims into insects, merging them with objects, and even manipulating video games. The theory proposes that Freddy doesn't just consume souls for sustenance, but actually absorbs their unique dream abilities, building an arsenal of supernatural powers over decades. This would explain why he must continue killing children, rather than simply existing immortally in the dream world. The theory remains speculative, but it transforms what appears to be narrative inconsistency across sequels into elegant internal logic. It shows how fans can retcon production decisions into coherent character development through creative interpretation. Stu Survived. The original Scream, released in 1996, revolutionized the slasher genre with its meta-commentary and shocking double-killer reveal. Billy Loomis and Stu Macher are exposed as the Ghostface killers, with both seemingly dying in the climax. Billy's death appears definitive with multiple gunshots, including one to the head, but Stu's fate is more ambiguous. He's last seen after a television is dropped on his head, lying motionless on the floor. A persistent fan theory suggests Stu survived and has been hiding for decades. The theory gained significant credibility when actor Matthew Lillard was confirmed to return for Scream 7, though the exact nature of his involvement remains undisclosed. Supporters note that unlike Billy, Stu's injuries could potentially be survived. The television blow was brutal but not necessarily fatal, and no one explicitly confirms his death. Sidney and Gale escape without checking Stu's body, and the police arrival happens off-screen. The theory proposes that Stu regained consciousness after everyone left, escaped during the chaos, and has been in hiding ever since, possibly in a psychiatric facility or living under a false identity. Some versions suggest he's been orchestrating or influencing subsequent Ghostface killings from the shadows. The theory exists in a unique space because Lillard's confirmed return means the character comes back somehow, but whether through survival, flashback, or supernatural means remains unknown. The survival theory remains unconfirmed, but genuinely possible. Freddy's boredom. One creative theory explains why Freddy Krueger transformed from the terrifying, mostly silent stalker of the original Nightmare on Elm Street into the wisecracking comedian of later sequels. A Redditor proposed that Freddy's dramatic tonal shift occurs after he discovers his true immortality following the events of the first film. In the 1984 original, Nancy seemingly defeats Freddy by removing the energy she had given him, effectively killing him. The film ends with a Freddy-colored car trapping the survivors, marking the first, somewhat comical approach to his kills. According to the theory, this moment represents Freddy realizing he cannot actually die. With genuine death no longer possible, and eternity stretching before him, he begins killing in increasingly creative and theatrical ways to stave off the boredom of immortal existence. Dream Warriors in 1987 marks the clear transition to a pun-heavy, joke-making Freddy. Later films feature elaborate, darkly humorous deaths, incorporating pop culture references and groan-inducing wordplay. The theory remains unconfirmed, but it reframes what was clearly a production decision to make Freddy more marketable as actual character development. This represents how fans retcon behind-the-scenes choices into internal narrative logic, finding psychological explanations for what were ultimately commercial considerations about toy sales and mainstream appeal. By the way, if this is the kind of content you're into, I create videos like this regularly. Subscribing would really help me out. Pamela's Magic. What if Crazy Ralph was right all along, and Camp Crystal Lake genuinely has a death curse seeping from the ground itself? This ambitious theory attempts to create unified mythology for the notoriously inconsistent Friday the 13th franchise. Throughout the original 1980 film, the character Crazy Ralph repeatedly warns that Camp Crystal Lake has a death curse, a statement everyone dismisses as rambling. The theory proposes that Pamela Voorhees practiced witchcraft before the film's events, and that her murder spree was actually an attempt to complete a resurrection spell for her drowned son on Jason. When she's decapitated at the climax before completing the final sacrifice, her magical energy allegedly seeped into Crystal Lake itself. This would explain Jason's resurrection in Part 2, despite appearing as a child in the first film's dream sequence. It could account for other supernatural occurrences like Tina Shepard's telekinetic powers developing specifically at the lake in The New Blood, and Tina's father somehow still being alive in the water, despite definitively drowning years earlier. The theory builds on director Adam Marcus's suggestion in Jason Goes to Hell that Pamela used dark magic. It would explain why Jason's intelligence fluctuates wildly, sometimes behaving like an animal, and other times demonstrating the ability to disable yacht radio equipment. When Lightning resurrects Jason in Part 6, Jason Lives, in 1986, the film offers no explanation whatsoever. This fan theory provides more satisfying mythology than most official explanations the franchise ever attempted, demonstrating how dedicated fans often become better continuity keepers than the creators themselves. Nancy dreamed. The climactic confrontation in the original Nightmare on Elm Street may never have actually happened in the real world. This theory proposes that Nancy dreamed the entire final act of the film. Nancy's plan to pull Freddy Krueger into reality contradicts the rules established throughout the movie about how the dream world functions. After she exits her house into what should be the real world, fog suddenly spreads unnaturally across the street. Her mother Marge makes several out-of-character statements. Children appear jumping rope while singing the Freddy Krueger theme song and haunting, otherworldly voices. The atmospheric and visual changes suggest Nancy never truly woke up at all. The film's actual ending shows the Freddy-colored car trapping Nancy and her surviving friends while claiming her mother as a victim. According to the theory, everything from Nancy pulling Freddy into the real world onward is a dream within a dream, an Inception-style false awakening. The theory remains unsupported by director Wes Craven, but it addresses significant logical problems in the beloved horror classic's conclusion. This interpretation makes the already unsettling ending even more nightmarish, suggesting Nancy never escaped at all. It demonstrates how fans work to resolve plot holes through darker, more complex readings, rather than accepting convenient narrative solutions. Multiple Fishermen. I Know What You Did Last Summer, released in 1997, follows 4 teenagers stalked by a fisherman-garbed killer 1 year after they accidentally killed a pedestrian and covered it up. The killer is eventually revealed to be Ben Willis, the man they hit, seeking revenge for being left for dead. However, a fan theory suggests multiple people wore the fisherman outfit throughout the film. According to this interpretation, Ben Willis didn't work alone but coordinated with family members or friends to punish the teenagers, with different people taking turns as the killer. The theory points to inconsistencies in the fisherman's behavior and capabilities. Sometimes the killer demonstrates knowledge he shouldn't possess, appears in multiple locations impossibly quickly, or shows varying physical abilities. The fisherman seems to know intimate details about all 4 teenagers' lives that would be difficult for one person to research while also stalking them. Additionally, the elaborate setups and the logistics of simultaneously monitoring 4 people suggest coordination. The killer makes bold public appearances in full fisherman gear, which some interpret as intentional intimidation, knowing the teenagers can't report him without confessing their own crime. The film reveals Ben Willis as the primary killer and mentions his son's involvement, but it never explicitly confirms Ben acted alone during all the killings. The movie leaves enough ambiguity about certain murders and appearances that the multiple killers theory remains unconfirmed but plausible. Whether one man or several enacted the revenge is never definitively established. Solar Hysteria. Comedian Patton Oswalt proposed a haunting reinterpretation of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in Alexander O. Philippe's documentary, Chain Reactions. According to Oswalt's theory, the violence in Tobe Hooper's 1974 masterpiece stems from solar activity causing mass hysteria affecting everyone in the film. Oswalt notes that characters repeatedly gaze upward at the brutal Texas sky throughout the movie, with the sun being an oppressive visual presence. The theory suggests both the Sawyer family and their victims descend into madness simultaneously as the sun's rays induce planet-wide lunacy. The famous final shot shows Leatherface spinning his chainsaw above his head at sunrise in what appears to be a frenzied dance. Oswalt interprets this iconic moment as Leatherface attempting to kill the sun with his chainsaw, striking at the source of the madness overwhelming him. This reading reframes Leatherface as a victim rather than a pure villain, someone driven to acts of horror by forces beyond his control or comprehension. Director Tobe Hooper left the ending deliberately ambiguous, never providing definitive explanation for the family's depravity. The solar madness theory remains entirely speculative and unsupported by the filmmaker, but it represents a fascinating modern reinterpretation from a respected cultural critic. This demonstrates how decades-old horror films continue generating fresh readings that add unexpected layers of meaning to works typically viewed as straightforward exploitation cinema. Spectral Possession. Prom Night, released in 1980, follows students at Hamilton High School being stalked and murdered on prom night by a masked killer seeking revenge for a childhood tragedy. The killer is revealed to be Alex, the brother of Robin, a girl who died in an abandoned building years earlier when she fell during a cruel game played by children. Alex blames 4 specific students, now teenagers, for his sister's death, and kills them on prom night. However, a persistent fan theory suggests Alex wasn't acting of his own free will, but was possessed by his dead sister's vengeful spirit. According to this interpretation, Robin's ghost became trapped in the abandoned building where she died, and over the years, her anger and confusion grew, until she found a way to possess her brother and enact revenge through his body. The theory points to Alex's unusual behavior throughout the film. He seems to have knowledge of events he wasn't present for, moves between locations impossibly quickly, and survives injuries that should incapacitate him. Most tellingly, after the killings, Alex appears confused and disoriented, as if waking from a dream or trance. Supporters suggest Robin's spirit fully possessed Alex on prom night specifically, using his body to punish the now teenage children responsible for her death. The film never addresses whether Alex was mentally ill, supernaturally influenced, or simply consumed by grief-driven rage. The possession theory remains entirely speculative, as the movie presents the murders as psychological breakdown. However, certain elements like Alex's altered demeanor during kills and his apparent confusion afterward leave room for supernatural interpretation that the film neither confirms nor denies. If you found this worth your time, consider subscribing so you never miss new content. Thanks for watching.